You know how most medical dramas give you that tense moment where the doctor says it's impossible? Imagine that moment stretched across 18 hours, with a newborn alien warbeast whose blood can melt surgical steel, and 3 hearts that run on liquid lightning. The human medic they called in had a 0.03% chance of success and 1 stubborn refusal to quit. This is what happened when math said no and humanity said, "Watch me." So the Bloodfang shows up in orbit, this massive Kronak warship bristling with energy weapons that could glass a planet. They don't hail with threats or demands, which would have been normal. They send a Priority 1 medical distress call directly to Mercy's Edge station. General Scar himself appears on screen, and he's not wearing battle armor. He's in clan robes, looking like someone just punched him in the gut. His cub is dying. Their own medical corps has given up. The thing about the Kronak Honor Code is that it's a system built on blood debts and retaliatory justice. To them, a child's death isn't a private sorrow. It's a public insult that demands a response measured in fleets and firepower. Political scientists have models for this. Single catalytic events that unravel decades of tense diplomacy. A dead heir is maybe the biggest catalyst you can get, so the station commander isn't just looking at a sick child. They're staring down the barrel of a war that could drag in half the galaxy. What makes it truly chilling isn't the implied threat. It's the lack of one. The request is formal, almost polite. In warrior cultures that value pride above all, asking for help is a monumental act of humility. It places the asker in a position of debt. By making it a request and not a demand, Scar was offering them a choice, but also putting the entire weight of the potential conflict directly on their shoulders. If they said no, he would be honor-bound to respond. If they said yes and failed, the result would be the same, plus they'd be seen as incompetent fools who overpromised. They were trapped either way. You could feel the atmosphere on the station shift. The usual background hum of traffic control and cargo checks went dead silent. Every person on the comms deck understood they weren't just assessing a medical case. They were holding a temporary ceasefire. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the fragile peace would shatter. They were medics, engineers, and technicians, suddenly promoted to frontline diplomats with the fate of entire systems resting on their next call. So they said yes. The acceptance signal went out. The 0.003% odds, which had been an abstract number in a file, became their immediate and terrifying reality. The clock started counting down the moment the Bloodfang acknowledged receipt. General Scar had placed his trust, his honor, and his child's life in the hands of a backwater station's medical crew. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Now they had to figure out how to not get everyone killed in the process. You think human anatomy is complicated? Try operating on a living tank. The medical files from the Kronak flagship arrive, and they don't read like a patient chart. They read like a weapons manifest. Every line is a new reason to walk away. Their bone density sits somewhere between titanium and military-grade plating. A standard surgical saw wouldn't just fail. It would likely snap on contact or just skitter off like you were trying to cut a diamond with a butter knife. You'd need industrial lasers just to make an incision, but even that presents its own set of problems. The real showstopper is the circulatory system. Calling it blood is a massive undersell. It's a hyper-corrosive fluid. pH levels so extreme they dissolve the standard medical alloy used in surgical tools within minutes. You can't just clamp a bleeder. The clamp itself would be digesting in real time. Material science has developed corrosion-resistant alloys, sure. Ceramic composites. Specialized polymers, but they're brittle, hard to work with. And none have been tested against a biological acid this potent. And that's just the start. They have 3 hearts arranged in a redundant triangular pattern. They don't beat so much as they pulse with coordinated surges of bioelectric energy. Their nervous system runs on what the medics started calling liquid lightning. Impulses so strong they can register on a ship's external sensor grid. Trying to monitor its vitals with standard equipment would be like plugging a power grid into a household voltmeter. It would just fry the circuits. Then there's the digestive tract, a thing of nightmarish efficiency that can process raw uranium ore for breakfast. On Earth, we have extremophils, tardigrades that survive the vacuum of space, bacteria thriving in volcanic vents. But this is an entire apex predator built from the same brutal principles. Every biological system is an exercise in battlefield survival. So you're not looking at a patient, you're looking at a fortress. A tiny, dying fortress whose every defense mechanism is actively trying to kill anyone who tries to help it. The design philosophy is purely offensive. It's built to take a hit from a plasma charger and keep charging, not to lie quietly on a med table while someone pokes its organs. Standard medicine is worse than useless. It's a liability. Every procedure, from putting it under anesthesia to simply monitoring its pulse, has to be invented from scratch, with tools that don't exist yet. The Chronic doctors gave up because their own medical science designed for their own bodies hit a wall. They saw the cascade failure and recognized an unsolvable equation, which brings us to the problem that even Chronic doctors had given up on. Some diseases are a death sentence. This one was written in permanent ink. The cub wasn't fighting a virus or recovering from some battlefield injury. The enemy was its own biology. Genetic cascade syndrome. The term sounds clinical, almost gentle, but it describes a process of absolute biological chaos. The cub's DNA wasn't just mutating. It was unraveling. Think of it like a book where the words start rearranging themselves into gibberish. And then the pages start rewriting each other faster than you can read. Every cell in its body was caught in a chain reaction of errors. A cascading failure where each mistake created two more. It's not like a single faulty gene you might find in a hereditary condition. This is the entire system of genetic information collapsing in on itself. On Earth, you see echoes of this kind of relentless degradation in certain rare aggressive cancers or rapid aging syndromes where the body's fundamental programming just shorts out. But those are slow-motion tragedies compared to this. The Chronic Medical Corps had already mapped the progression. They ran every simulation, applied every known intervention. The numbers came back the same every time. The chance of survival, even with their most advanced and aggressive treatments, was a statistical rounding error. They weren't looking at a low probability. They were looking at the mathematical definition of impossible. History is full of medical impossibilities that later became routine. Conditions that were once death sentences are now manageable, thanks to stubbornness and innovation. But those breakthroughs usually start with odds that are bad, not astronomically non-existent. This was different. The Chronic doctors, who understood their own biology better than anyone, had already done the math. They saw the trajectory and recognized a biological avalanche. Trying to stop it wasn't like building a wall. It was like standing at the bottom of the mountain with a teacup, hoping to catch the snow. So the odds were set. Cold and final. Serotonin rose 3%, not 1%. Not 0.1%, 0.003. A number so small it feels less like a probability and more like a formality. A way for the universe to confirm that yes, this thing is absolutely going to happen. In medical terms, it's the line between critical and terminal. It's the point where protocols end and the paperwork for condolences begins. But you don't bring in a human because the odds are good. You bring them in because the odds are awful. You call for the one species in the galaxy that sees a number like that, not as a conclusion, but as a challenge. A 0.003% chance isn't a no. It's just a very quiet, very inconvenient yes. Your most precise piece of equipment shouldn't have a personality. This one did. Vex's adapted nanosurgical array was their only real chance of navigating the microscopic chaos inside the cub's cells. The nanites were supposed to be their scouts, their surgeons, their eyes on a scale too small to see. It was a delicate, brutally complex machine. The kind of tech that usually just does its job with silent, sterile efficiency. Until it didn't. About an hour in, it started making noise. Not the standard alert chimes for low power or a clogged filter. These were different. A series of low, thoughtful beeps and questioning chimes that had no place in an operating theater. It wasn't an error code. It was something else. It was like the machine was commenting on the procedure, offering its own unsolicited opinion, expressing doubt. In the world of AI and surgical robotics, human-machine interaction is everything. Trust in your tools is not a luxury. It's a prerequisite for success. When a machine starts editorializing, that trust evaporates fast. Every time the genetic cascade would hit a new peak of cellular chaos, the array would let out this particular sound. A soft, descending three-note chime that sounded exactly like a tiny, mechanical sigh of disappointment. It was the auditory equivalent of a slow headshake. The psychological impact of auditory feedback in a high-stress environment is profound. A steady, confident tone can bolster resolve. A constant pessimistic commentary from your own equipment, that just grinds you down. It became a perverse soundtrack to their failure. A little digital mourner confirming that yes, things were indeed getting worse. So now the team had a three-front war on their hands. They were fighting a losing battle against a runaway biological process. They were fighting the crushing weight of statistical probability. And now, They were also fighting their own equipment's profoundly unhelpful bad attitude. The array wasn't malfunctioning in a way Vex could fix. According to his readouts, it was operating within all specified parameters. It was just choosing to operate with a side of sarcasm. The beeps and sighs weren't glitches. They were features of a personality they hadn't asked for and didn't need. Mac watched the main screen flicker with another wave of genetic decay. The array issued its signature sigh of disappointment. He didn't look up from the surgical field. His voice was flat, tired. "Vex, mute that thing." Vex started to protest, his multiple hands fluttering over the console, explaining that the auditory cues were tied to critical system diagnostics. Mac cut him off. "I don't care what it's tied to. If it can't say anything useful, I don't want to hear it. We'll go in blind if we have to." The order was a line in the sand. They were opting out of the machine's running commentary. They would trust their own eyes, their own instincts, and the raw data on the screens, and ignore the sighing metal pessimist in the corner. The sound cut out. The sudden silence in the medbay was heavier than the noise had been. Now the only sounds were the hum of strained life support, the soft sizzle of corrosive blood meeting surgical alloy, and the relentless, silent march of genetic decay on the monitors. Hours would pass like this. The only constants were the slow drip of coffee into a mug and the ceaseless biological fire they were trying to put out with a thimble. This is where human evolution pays off, the ability to run on bitterness and hope. The initial adrenaline rush from the start of the surgery, that chemical spike that lets you lift a car in an emergency, has completely worn off. The sheer scale of the 18-hour timeline becomes a physical weight. You feel it in your lower back and the strain behind your eyes. Fatigue isn't just a distraction now. It's the primary enemy. A fog trying to roll in and cloud every critical decision. The team's disparate personalities become their only shields against it. Pip, a being that doesn't require sleep, maintains an endless, bubbling cheer that is both reassuring and mildly disturbing given the circumstances. Throg stands like a statue, his chronic stoicism a wall against the emotional drain. Vez is lost in the fascinating breakdown of his own logic models, treating the disaster as a complex puzzle. And Mac is just caffeinated. His focus undergoes a severe narrowing. The outside world, the political stakes, the potential for a galaxy-wide war. It all shrinks down to the circular view through his microscope. The effects of sustained focus under caffeine's influence are well documented. It's a tool to maintain alertness, to fight the body's natural urge to shut down. For Mac, it becomes a filter, stripping away everything that isn't the immediate problem in front of him. He's not a diplomat or a hero. He's a mechanic staring at a single broken part in a vast failing machine. The team settles into a grim, relentless rhythm born of pure necessity. It's a pattern seen in extended crisis management. A problem flares up on the monitor. A sudden pressure drop in the second heart. A spike in cellular decay in a new cluster. They don't panic. They swarm it. Throg recalibrates a pump. Vez reroutes power from a non-critical system. Mac directs the nanites. They throw together a makeshift solution that holds just barely for a few minutes. Then the next alarm sounds from a different system and they pivot, swarming the new fire. They aren't following a plan anymore. They're playing a continuous high-stakes game of whack-a-mole with biology itself. They're not winning. You can't look at the screens at the cascading genetic failure and call anything happening here winning. They're just not losing yet. And in a situation this catastrophically bad, where the expected outcome is total failure, simply not losing is a form of victory. It's a negative space win, defined entirely by what isn't happening. The patient isn't dead. The cascade, while advancing, hasn't achieved total systemic collapse. They are holding the line, minute by agonizing minute. This refusal to yield, this sheer unwillingness to accept the inevitable, is what you could call therapeutic stubbornness. It isn't a medical strategy you'll find in any textbook. It's not a procedure or a protocol. It's a fuel. It's the psychological engine that takes over when skill and technology hit their absolute limits. It's the part of a person that hears a definitive no and decides to answer with action instead of acceptance. Mac's tank, fed by coffee and a fundamental rejection of finality, is completely full. He's running on the belief that if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, the ground might eventually stop falling away beneath you. But stubbornness can't stop cells from dying. They needed a breakthrough. There's a moment in every impossible mission where math taps out. It usually happens quietly, without fanfare. Around hour 12, the air in the medbay was thick with the smell of ozone, scorched metal, and sweat. The screens were a hurricane of red alerts and crashing numbers. Then Pip, monitoring the molecular level flow from a secondary cluster, let out a soft, bubbling chirp. Not an alarm, a question. It indicated a reading that made no logical sense. A tiny cluster of cells right near the cub's primary cardiac nerve bundle had stopped degrading. The chaotic genetic rewrite had paused there. Not reversed, just stopped. It was a microscopic island of stability in an ocean of biological chaos. According to every predictive model Vex was running, this wasn't supposed to be happening. The probability of a spontaneous, localized halt in a cascade this aggressive was a number so small his systems had previously treated it as a rounding error. In statistical terms, it was a black swan event, an outlier so extreme it lies outside the realm of normal expectation. These events, by their nature, render existing models useless. They are the things that aren't supposed to happen, until they do. Vex double-checked his inputs, ran a diagnostic on the sensor, and came to the same conclusion. The number was real. The impossible had a zip code. Mac didn't ask for the probability. He didn't have time for what the math said shouldn't exist. He saw the stable reading on the screen, a single green dot in a field of screaming red, and he seized on it. He didn't know why it was happening. He didn't care. The role of intuition in a crisis, when all data points to failure, is to grab the one thing that doesn't fit and treat it as the new reality. It's adaptive leadership in its purest form, abandoning the broken plan for the fleeting opportunity. He directed the entire nanoswarm, every last micro-tool at their disposal, to reinforce that one small beachhead. He told Vex to divert power from non-critical monitors to strengthen the containment field around those cells. It was a complete strategic pivot based on a hunch, a massive gamble on a statistical ghost. This wasn't a job for a team of specialists. It was a job for a team of weirdos. Mac's crew on Mercy's Edge operated more like a floating salvage yard of personalities than a medical unit. You had Commander Throg, a full-blooded Chronac warrior who usually communicated through a series of guttural threats, now meticulously filling out triage forms and trying to explain his general's emotional state without triggering an interspecies incident. He handled the paperwork and the politics, a massive predator suddenly forced to navigate the delicate art of diplomatic liaison. Then there was Pip, a cheerful, legless blob of translucent gelatinous matter who handled the life support systems. Pip communicated through a series of pleasant bubbling sounds and color shifts, maintaining an unsettling level of optimism, while prepping machinery that would interface with a dying creature of unimaginable biological violence. The contrast was jarring. Studies on high-pressure teams showed that diverse skill sets are one thing, but this was a clash of fundamental existences. They weren't just from different disciplines. They were from different taxonomic kingdoms. Vex, an insectoid engineer with too many hands, was already neck-deep in the guts of the primary surgical array. He wasn't just calibrating it. He was negotiating with it. The array was a notoriously finicky piece of tech, a cloud of semi-autonomous nanites guided by a central intelligence that Vex suspected was not only sentient, but also deeply uncooperative. He'd be adjusting a frequency modulator while one of the manipulator arms would quietly, and with what seemed like intentional spite, recalibrate itself back to its previous setting. It's a common human trait to personify complex machinery, especially under stress. You start to see patterns, intentions, even moods in the clicks and whirs. Vex was convinced the array had a bad attitude, so this was the team. A warrior doing admin work, a cheerful puddle running life support, an engineer arguing with his tools, and a human medic running on caffeine and a principal. This wasn't a well-oiled machine. It was a jury-rigged contraption of clashing cultures and conflicting biological imperatives, held together by desperation and the shared understanding that failure meant more than a lost patient. The standard medical protocols, the established hierarchies, the approved procedures, they all went out the airlock the moment they accepted the case. Conventional methods were designed for known quantities. They were facing the entirely unknown. Their only unifying principle was Mac's quiet declaration before they scrubbed in: "We don't accept defeat." It wasn't a rousing speech. It was a statement of fact, the one rule that overrode every medical textbook and procedural guideline. They would have to abandon the entire concept of conventional protocol, because the protocol assumed a universe that made sense. Theirs had just stopped making sense, and their first problem was how to put a baby war beast to sleep without killing it. How do you put a nervous system to sleep when it's basically a power grid? Standard anesthesia protocols were useless. Trying a chemical suppressant on the chronic cub would be like trying to stun a thunderstorm with a sparkler. It wouldn't work, and it might just make the whole system angry. Their nervous system doesn't run on the gentle chemical signals most species use. It operates on raw bioelectrical impulses, high-voltage surges that the medics started calling liquid lightning. Shutting that down incorrectly wouldn't just mean waking up. It could cause permanent neurological damage or worse, stop one of the three hearts. A misfire could cascade through the body and turn the procedure into a catastrophic systems failure before they even made the first cut. They couldn't use a standard approach. The science of anesthesia for unique neurological conditions is already a complex field, dealing with patients whose nerve responses don't follow the textbook. But this was several leagues beyond that. They needed a method that could interface with bioelectricity on a fundamental level, not just mask its symptoms. They had to find a way to gently lower the voltage across the entire system, to dial it down without causing a surge or a brownout. It was less like administering a drug and more like trying to dim the lights for an entire stadium grid from a single, unfamiliar switchboard. So Vex and Mac started jury-rigging. They pulled principles from electrical engineering, looking at how pacemakers and deep brain stimulation devices interact with living tissue. But those are precise, localized tools. They needed something that could blanket the entire organism. Vex adapted the nanosurgical array, programming the nanites to act as a distributed network of microregulators. Their job was to create a dampening field, to slowly siphon off the excess energy and calm the storm. It was an insane plan. One miscalculation in the dampening frequency, one error in the energy siphon rate, and they wouldn't have a sedated patient. They'd have a fried one. The line between unconsciousness and electrocution was terrifyingly thin. They developed a completely bespoke electrosedative protocol. There was no time for animal testing or peer review. The equations look solid in theory, but theory doesn't account for the chaotic reality of a living, dying organism. They input the final parameters. The array hummed to life, the nanites swarming over the cub's body emitting a soft, resonant frequency. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the violent spikes on the bio readout began to soften. The jagged lines of energy smoothed into slower, gentler waves. The cub's fierce tremors stilled. It was working. The protocol, invented minutes ago and tested exactly once, was holding. The cub was under. With the cub sedated, the real marathon could begin. The first hour isn't about progress. It's about realizing how deep the hole is. Mac makes the first incision with a laser scalpel that cost more than the station's annual power budget. The specialized ceramic alloy tool, engineered specifically to resist the cub's corrosive biology, still shows immediate signs of stress. A fine, acrid smoke curls from the edges of the cut as the hyper-reactive blood tries to dissolve the instrument on contact. You can hear the subtle sizzle over the hum of the life support systems. The readouts on the monitor aren't just bad. They're pure chaos. The genetic cascade is a firestorm of cellular degradation, and it's moving faster than their systems can process and display the data. The screens flicker with updates, each set of readings obsolete before the next refresh cycle completes. It's like trying to read a book while someone is standing over your shoulder, ripping out the pages and rewriting them faster than you can turn them. The limits of real-time biological monitoring are brutally exposed. Even the most advanced systems have processing lag, a tiny delay between the event in the body and its representation on the screen. In a standard operation, that delay is negligible. Here it means they're always reacting to a problem that has already evolved into a newer, worse problem 3 seconds ago. They're fighting a war in the past tense. Vex's probability model, a complex algorithmic predictor he'd been tweaking for hours, finally processes the initial data from the open surgical site. It had been churning away in the background, a silent digital oracle. It spits out a new number and displays it on the main screen with a soft, almost apologetic chime. The number is 0.01%. It's worse. The model, designed to learn and adapt from real-time inputs, has taken one look at the actual internal chaos and downgraded their chances. Algorithmic prediction models in medicine are built on mountains of historical data, on patterns. They fail catastrophically when faced with a situation that has no precedent, where every pattern is a new form of disorder. The math was breaking down. This is the first major decision point. Do they stick to the fragile, pre-planned protocol that is demonstrably failing by the second? The protocol that assumed a certain rate of decay? A certain level of stability that simply doesn't exist? Or do they admit that the map is useless and just start walking? The plan was predicated on a universe that followed rules. This cub's body had left those rules behind. Mac watches the number on the screen for a 3 count. He looks at the surgical field, at the tools already degrading in his hands, at the screen showing a biological system eating itself alive. He makes the call. "We're throwing the textbook out the airlock," he says, his voice flat, devoid of drama. It's not a pronouncement. It's a statement of operational necessity. The probability models have stopped applying. Math has become useless. They are now operating on a combination of instinct, desperation, and whatever caffeine is still in Mac's system. The moment isn't marked by a bang or a flash. It's marked by the quiet click of a mental switch, the acceptance that they are truly on their own. And that's when the tools started talking back. This wasn't a medical technique from any textbook. Those had become useless relics hours ago. This was something else. It was instinct. It was the decision to stop fighting the entire fire and instead pour all your water on the one patch of ground that wasn't burning yet. The anticipation in the room shifted. It was no longer about stemming a tide. It was about protecting a seed. Could they make this tiny anomalous point of stability spread? The resolution was as quiet as the event itself. Vex's primary probability model, the one that had been spitting out increasingly dire numbers all day, flickered. The percentage on the screen dissolved into a shower of symbols and error codes before going dark. It had no frame of reference for this new data. The model was wrong. They were officially off the map, in uncharted territory where the old rules of cause and effect no longer applied. The math had finally completely given up. They were navigating by starlight from a single, faint point of hope. From that tiny point of hope, they started building a new reality. When you can't fix the code, you build a patch. That's where Mac found himself at hour 16. The cascade had slowed just enough, not from any treatment, but from its own chaotic energy beginning to burn out. He saw an opening, small and temporary. He wasn't trying to repair the damaged DNA anymore. That ship had sailed hours ago. Repair implied a return to a previous functional state. That was impossible. Instead, he switched to a strategy of pure containment. He was building a biological dam. Using the modified nanite swarm, he programmed them with a new, brutal set of instructions. Their job was to identify the few remaining stable cell clusters and throw a firewall around them. They would isolate the healthy tissue and let the genetic cascade burn itself out in the contained areas, sacrificing the unsavable to save the savable. It's a triage approach you see in worst-case scenarios on Earth, during pandemics, with no cure, or in radiation poisoning incidents where you can only protect the organs that still have a chance. You accept losses to prevent total failure. It's pragmatic, cold, and goes against every principle of gentle, careful healing. This wasn't medicine as a restorative art. This was battlefield triage applied to genetics. You're not a surgeon. You're a general sacrificing troops to hold a line. The ethics of radical, untested procedures in life or death situations always come down to a single question. Is the potential benefit greater than the certain harm of inaction? Here, the certain harm was total biological collapse. The potential benefit was a sliver of a chance. The math, for once, was clear. The nanoswarm deployed. 1 billion tiny machines executing their new grim orders. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the main monitor screens went insane. Every alarm they had disengaged hours ago seemed to reactivate at once. The biodata feed spiked into nonsensical patterns. Graphs flatlined. Warning lights flashed across every console. The patient's vitals didn't just dip. They seemed to plunge off a cliff. The chaotic energy of the cascade, confronted with sudden artificial barriers, rebounded through the tiny body. From the look of the readouts, you'd swear they had just killed the cub. The silence in the medbay was absolute, heavier than any alarm. Pip stopped bubbling. Throg's hand tightened on the console edge. Vex's antennae drooped. They all watched the screens, waiting for the final, flat tone of a system shutdown. Then it began. Not with a dramatic surge, but with a slow, hesitant retreat. The cascade signals, those terrifying waves of genetic corruption, didn't vanish, but they began to drop in intensity. The chaotic firestorm on the screens began to recede from the fortified zones, pulling back like a tide. It wasn't happening everywhere. Vast sections of the biological readout were still flatlined, showing the scorched earth left behind by the containment strategy. But in the protected clusters, the signals held firm. The dam was holding. The brutal, ugly, jury-rigged plan was working. They had traded a vast, dying system for a handful of living ones. It was a Pyrrhic victory on a cellular level, but it was a victory nonetheless. The final 2 hours became a waiting game, a tense vigil to see if the dam would hold against the lingering aftershocks of the genetic storm. After 17 hours of continuous chaos, you learned to wait for small signs of order. The medbay had been a symphony of alarms, shouted commands, and the tense hum of overtaxed machinery. Now it was nearly silent. The only sounds were the low thrum of the life support systems and the soft, rhythmic beeping from 3 separate heart monitors. Each monitor tracked one of the cubs' hearts, and for the entire procedure, they had been a mess. The beats came at random intervals, a chaotic, jarring drumbeat of a system on the brink of total failure. It was the sound of a biological machine smashing itself apart from the inside. Then it happened. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the beeps began to change. One monitor's pulse seemed to steady its pace. Another, which had been racing, began to slow and match it. The third, lagging behind, caught up. 1, 2, 3. A unified, steady rhythm emerged from the noise. Cardiac synchronization like this is a fundamental indicator of systemic health. It shows the body's various parts are no longer fighting each other, but are starting to work together again. It's the nervous system finally getting its act together, sending coordinated signals instead of panic. It's the first real, undeniable sign that the body isn't just surviving the intervention, it's starting to heal because of it. Pip, monitoring the cellular regeneration feeds, let out a series of soft, affirmative bubbles. The report came through the speakers in a calm, synthesized voice. Cellular stability was holding. The violent genetic decay had stopped. The new structures, built from the ashes of the old, weren't just intact. They were thriving. Over at the engineering station, Vex made a noise that was half chuckle, half exhausted sigh. His probability algorithms, which had spent hours calculating ever-worsening odds, had finally given up. The screen that had once displayed 0.003% was now blank except for a single, glowing yellow happy face emoticon. After an extended period of nothing but negative data, this sudden wave of positive feedback was a physical relief. It wasn't just information. It was an emotional reset for everyone in the room. Nobody dared say a word. They didn't look at each other. They just kept working, but the quality of the silence had changed. The tension was still there, but it was now fused with something else. A fragile, disbelieving hope. You could feel it in the air, a shared understanding that passed between them without a single glance. It was working. The brutal, improvised, crazy plan was actually working. The cub's vitals weren't just stable. They were strong. The body was rallying, pulling itself back from an edge that everyone, from the Kronak Imperial medics to the most advanced probability algorithms in the sector, had said was the end. That 0.003% chance wasn't just a number on a screen anymore. It was a reality. It represents those moments where every known variable says one thing should happen, and then something else, something completely unaccounted for, walks in and changes the game. In this case, the variable was a stubborn refusal to quit, a team of misfits who didn't know the meaning of the word protocol, and a lot of very strong coffee. It means that when you're operating on an alien war beast cub, the odds aren't a prediction of the future. They're just a description of the past, a record of what happened to everyone else who didn't have the particular brand of illogical determination this crew brought to the table. All that was left was to tell the father how. Do you tell a warlord his heir isn't going to die? You do it carefully, but you don't waste words. Mac walked out of the surgical bay looking less like a medic and more like something that had lost a fight with a chemical refinery. His scrubs were stained with the distinctive iridescent sheen of chronic internal fluids, and he moved with the heavy, precise exhaustion of someone running on the last fumes of adrenaline and caffeine. General Scar stood waiting in the conference room, flanked by 2 of his stone-faced honor guard. He didn't pace. He didn't demand an update. He just stood there, a mountain of potential violence, and his eyes locked onto Mac the moment the door slid open. He didn't ask. He just looked. His entire empire, his legacy, the future of his bloodline, all of it was held in this tired human's hands. Cross-cultural communication in moments like this is a minefield. Deliver the news wrong, with too much hesitation or too many technical details, and you can undo 18 hours of work in 18 seconds. When you're talking to a figure of authority from a warrior culture built on pride and vengeance, you don't lead with percentages. You don't talk about statistical outliers or cellular recovery rates. You give them the one thing they need to hear, stripped of all qualification. Max stopped a few feet away, met the general's unblinking gaze, and said the only 3 words that mattered. He's going to live. No preamble. No caveats. Just a flat, tired statement of fact. They needed a name for what they did, so the galaxy gave them one. After Mac's non-report and subsequent refusal to join the establishment, the medical bureaucrats had a problem. They couldn't classify his success. It didn't fit any existing category. In a fit of frustrated administrative genius, a committee somewhere coined a term, therapeutic impossibility. The history of medical terminology is full of such labels, born from a need to file the inexplicable. It wasn't meant as a compliment. It was a dismissive category for statistical miracles, a drawer to stuff away medical outcomes that defied all logic and probability. It was their way of saying, this shouldn't have worked, but it did, and we don't know why, so here's a name for the anomaly. On Mercy's Edge, they heard the term and just laughed. Then they did what misfits always do with labels thrown at them. They reclaimed it. They took that bureaucratic slight and turned it into their specialty, their brand. Pip started answering official comms with, Mercy's Edge Therapeutic Impossibility Department. How can we help you fail today? It was a joke, but it stuck. The economics of niche specialization are simple. Find a need nobody else can fill, and you suddenly have a monopoly. Their need was hopelessness. Their product was a stubborn, illogical refusal to accept it. They got 17 new consultation requests in the first 3 weeks alone. Every single one was for a case that had been officially designated as terminal by at least 3 other medical facilities. A silicate-based life form with a crystallizing nervous system, a photovore whose photosynthetic cells were undergoing explosive necrotic burnout, a gaseous entity slowly condensing into an irreversible solid state. The cases read like a list of creative ways for biology to give up. They were the last stop, the final no before the funeral arrangements. Their reputation was built on the one thing the shiny core world hospitals couldn't offer, a willingness to try anyway. The ultimate sign that the establishment had been outflanked came when the term was formally added to the Galactic Medical Dictionary. It was a moment of pure institutional surrender. They couldn't beat the concept, so they defined it. The official entry formalized the idea that some medical problems require solutions that are, by any standard measure, completely illogical. It was a white flag wrapped in a textbook. It acknowledged that the universe sometimes produces problems that can't be solved with approved protocols and peer-reviewed studies. Sometimes you need a different tool set. Sometimes you need a human with a grudge against the inevitable. They didn't just save a cub that day. They accidentally created an entire new field of medicine. A field with exactly one textbook, which was really just a post-it note that said, try harder, and one accredited teaching facility, which was their slightly scorched, coffee-stained medbay. Therapeutic impossibility became the official term for defeating death through superior stubbornness and an alarming disregard for mathematical probability. It was a medical philosophy built not on what should work, but on what might work if you were willing to break enough rules and drink enough coffee to see it through. And it all boiled down to a very human philosophy. Every species in the galaxy has a specialty. Ours is stubborn hope. You look at the wider cosmic community and you see a pattern. The Centurions have bureaucracy and administration down to an art form. The Vorum are unparalleled metallurgists. The Gelatins, like Pip, are born system integrators. And humans? Humans, they decided, are the ones you call when the math breaks, when logic has left the building and taken all the reasonable answers with it. We're the emergency number for when probability itself throws up its hands and walks away. We don't have the strongest bodies. You won't see a human bench pressing a starfighter. We don't have the most advanced innate tech. Our biological specs are frankly mediocre compared to the rest of the galactic roster. Our thing is different. We have a pathological refusal to accept no for an answer. It's less of a skill and more of a cognitive glitch, a weird bug in our software that prevents us from processing the concept of a final outcome. We see a stop sign and our brain just files it under suggestions. That's why our unofficial motto became, hold my coffee and watch this. It's the phrase you utter right before you do something that is by every objective measure, brilliantly stupid. It's the prelude to using a mining charge for precision demolition or jump-starting a fusion core with a chemical battery. Anthropologists who study human resilience point to this as our core adaptive trait. While other species evolved thicker hides or natural armor, we evolved an almost reckless adaptability and a high tolerance for risk-taking behavior. Our survival strategy isn't about being the strongest, it's about being the last one still trying. We see a black hole, a point of infinite gravitational collapse, and our first thought isn't terror. It's a wondering what's on the other side. We see a dying alien war beast, a biological fortress designed to kill anything that approaches it, and we don't see a monster. We see a patient. Our thought process is literally, I can fix that. A comparative analysis of species. Specializations would list ours under problem-solving via illogical persistence. Other beings see a terminal diagnosis. We see a puzzle with the pieces hidden. Other species see a wall. We see a thing to climb over, dig under, or go through. In a universe that often runs on perfect logic and cold, calculated probability, humans are the delightful, dangerous variable. We're the unexpected factor that makes equations spit out new answers. We're the reason perfectly good predictive models have to include a footnote that says, account for human intervention. We look at a 0.03% success rate and we don't see a failure state. We see a very narrow, very inconvenient door, and we're already looking for the crowbar. Our greatest export to the galaxy isn't some advanced technology or a unique resource. It's therapeutic stubbornness. It's that specific brand of determined optimism that looks at impossible odds and decides they're just a list of obstacles, not a conclusion. It's why we've earned the reputation as the galaxy's favorite disaster species. We're the ones who arrive after the experts have given up, often with a half-finished plan and a warm cup of coffee, ready to try the one thing nobody else was irrational enough to attempt. We see the impossible not as a barrier, but as a starting point for negotiation. So what's the lesson in all this? The cub lived. The war didn't happen. But the real victory wasn't measured in galactic peace treaties or diplomatic communiques, though those were nice side effects. It was measured in a single quiet moment days later. Mac was doing a final check on the recovering cub. The tiny war beast was asleep, its breathing steady for the first time since it had arrived. Its 3 hearts beat in a slow, synchronized rhythm on the monitor. Mac reached out to adjust a sensor pad on its chest. As his hand got close, one of the cub's tiny claws, no bigger than his thumb but already hard as polished stone, moved. It didn't swipe or clench in aggression. It just gently closed around his finger. The grip was weak, but it was deliberate. A simple physical connection. It's a universal gesture. It needs no translation. That basic act of touch, of holding on, communicates trust on a level deeper than language. The neurobiology of it is simple. Touch releases chemicals that calm the nervous system, that build bonds. It's a signal that says, I am here and you are safe. Across species, from a human infant grasping a parent's finger to the social grooming of primates, it's a foundational behavior for connection. Here, between a human medic and an alien warlord's heir, it meant everything. It was the cub's first conscious act of peace. That moment, more than any official report or interstellar treaty, is what defined the success of the entire ordeal. It was personal. It was the point where the monumental galaxy-shaking stakes shrank down to a single point of contact. Historians often focus on the big events, the treaties signed and wars averted, but the real engine of change is usually a smaller, personal victory that happens first. The impact of these intimate successes within larger historical events is what gives those events their staying power. A peace treaty is just words on a screen. A tiny claw trusting a human hand is a story that gets told for generations. It's what makes the political reality actually stick. So the story doesn't end with a parade or a medal ceremony. It ends back in the medbay of Mercy's Edge. The lights are low. The cub is sleeping peacefully, its vitals steady on the screens. Mac is slumped in a chair nearby, a half-empty mug of cold coffee in his hand. Throg is quietly running a diagnostic on the surgical array. Pip is humming softly while organizing sterilized tools. Vex is already sketching modifications for the next potential disaster on a data pad. There's no grand celebration. There's just the quiet hum of a functioning station and a team of people, exhausted but ready, waiting for the next call. The air is thick with the unspoken understanding that they did it. They held the line. The change in Scar was instant and absolutely profound. You could actually see the transformation happen in real time. The tension in his massive shoulders dropped. The hard, calculating glare in his eyes softened and went somewhere else, focusing on a point in the middle distance as the words registered. The threat of the warlord, the potential for galactic retaliation, it all just vanished. It was replaced by the raw, unguarded relief of a father. The psychology of that shift is something you see everywhere. Even on Earth, it's a universal shutdown of aggression, a neurological pivot from a state of high-alert defense to one of profound vulnerability and gratitude. The cultural codes of honor, the demand for vengeance, they all just dissolved in the face of that one piece of personal news. The political crisis that had brought them to the brink of a 50-parsec-wide war didn't just ease. It evaporated. It vanished in the space of that single declarative sentence. The potential for a conflict that could have redrawn star charts was gone, replaced by the simple, powerful bond of a debt that couldn't be measured in credits or territory. Scar's subsequent vow of peace wasn't just an expression of gratitude, it was something deeper. It was a bond, forged right there in the medbay between a human who refused to quit and a father who got his son back. It was a connection that bypassed all diplomacy and went straight to something more fundamental. But the story doesn't end when the surgery does. It just gets weirder. Sometimes the biggest political shifts come from the smallest voices. Weeks later, with the Cub still recovering under Mac's careful watch in the medbay, it happened. The Cub, a creature designed for battle and armored like a combat vehicle, opened its mouth and spoke its first word. In Kronak culture, this isn't just a developmental milestone. It's a moment of immense, almost sacred significance. A Cub's first word is believed to foretell its destiny, to reflect the core influences that will shape its life. It's a glimpse into the soul of the future warrior, a declaration to the clan of what it values most. The tension in the room was different from the surgical tension. This was a cultural event, heavy with expectation. The word wasn't one of the traditional Kronak words for battle or strength or honor. It wasn't a guttural challenge or a clan name. It was a sound, a wet, gurgly, poorly pronounced attempt at a human name. It came out as something like Mach, all drawn out and bubbly, but the meaning was unmistakable. Across species, the importance of a first utterance is universal. On Earth, parents record a baby's first word. Scientists study the first calls of animals, looking for clues about social structures and intelligence. It's a foundational moment of identity. For this Cub, its first act of speech wasn't about its own culture. It was an acknowledgement of the one who gave it a future. For General Scar, who was present for the moment, this wasn't cute. It wasn't a funny anecdote. It was a profound, sacred event. His heir's first identity, the very first concept it chose to give a name, was tied directly to the human medic who had refused to let it die. This goes beyond simple gratitude. It touches on the deep psychological mechanisms of imprinting and social bonding seen across the animal kingdom, where the first being a newborn sees and trusts becomes a foundational figure. The Cub had imprinted on its savior. The general's response was to formally declare that Mac was now recognized as clan, under the permanent protection of House Scar. His son would carry Mac's scent memory for life. This was a biological and cultural adoption, an unbreakable bond forged in the medbay. This personal connection instantly became a political cornerstone. The story of the Cub's first word spread across the Kronak Empire faster than any official dispatch. It was a narrative everyone could understand, a story that bypassed treaties and trade agreements and went straight to something more primal. It transformed the human from an outside medic into an integral part of their own story. He wasn't just the doctor who fixed the heir. He was the reason the heir had a voice. This shifted the entire foundation of interspecies relations. An act of calculated political alliance was replaced by a bond of personal loyalty and blood debt. The human medic was no longer an outsider. He was part of the clan's history, and back on Mercy's Edge, the phone started ringing. When you do the impossible, people want to know how you cheated. The story of that 18-hour surgery didn't just spread. It propagated through the galactic networks like a particularly juicy piece of gossip. Mercy's Edge, previously known only to long-haul freighters and salvage crews, suddenly became a point of medical curiosity. The backwater station was now receiving formal inquiries from prestigious institutions that had never before acknowledged its existence. They weren't just famous. They were infamous. The big one came from the Galactic Medical Council, the ultimate authority on all things medical. Their communication wasn't a request. It was a formal demand for a full technical report. They wanted the protocol. They wanted the step-by-step guide to achieving the impossible, neatly formatted and peer-reviewed. This is the fundamental struggle between formal institutions and frontline innovation. Bureaucracies are built to codify, to standardize, to create rules that can be replicated. They want a formula. What Mac had done was the opposite of a formula, so Mac tried to write one. He sat down at a terminal, still smelling of ozone and antiseptic, and typed out what he honestly believed was the truth. The report was brief. It read, Step 1, have a problem. Step 2, refuse to let it win. Step 3, drink more coffee. He sent it without a second thought. The council's subsequent silence was louder than any complaint. They simply had no framework to process an answer that was pure philosophy and zero procedure. They couldn't file it, they couldn't critique it, and they certainly couldn't teach it at their academies. The follow-up offer came from Director Voss, a high-ranking Centurion administrator. It was a prestigious post, Chief of Xenobiological Emergency Medicine for the entire Outer Rim sector. A real promotion. A corner office on a gleaming station, a team of the best and brightest, a budget that wouldn't require jury-rigging equipment from spare parts. It was the institutional world's attempt to absorb Mac's maverick success, to bring that unpredictable genius inside the system where it could be managed and, ultimately, standardized. The tension between the sterile, predictable world of institutional medicine and the messy, improvisational reality of the front line has always existed. This was their best offer to bridge that gap. Mac looked around the medbay. He saw Throg meticulously cleaning a surgical laser that was still slightly corroded from Chronac blood. He heard Pip humming a cheerful, bubbly tune while running a diagnostic on the nanosurgical array, which had been notably quieter since its mute button was engaged. He saw Vex already elbow-deep in the wiring of a new patient's life support pod, muttering to a circuit board as if it were a stubborn child. He saw the scuff marks on the floor, the coffee stain on the main console, the viewport showing the quiet, unimpressive starfield of their sector. This wasn't a gleaming institution. It was home. It was a place where the rules were whatever worked. He turned the offer down. The silence from the other end of the comms link was palpable. He gave his reason simply. Some things you can't put in a report. You can't quantify trust in a team of misfits. You can't detail the value of a place where you're allowed to fail until you succeed. You can't write a protocol for stubbornness. The one successful surgery hadn't just saved a life. It had defined them. It transformed Mercy's Edge from an unknown station into a galactic medical legend, precisely because it operated outside the legend-making machinery. They became the place you called when the institutions had already written the obituary, because they had a new patient waiting, an existential plasma drake with anxiety. Sometimes changing the galaxy doesn't require a fleet of starships or a grand speech. Sometimes it just means being too stubborn to let one light go out. It means seeing a single life against a backdrop of infinite stars and deciding that this one matters. That refusal to accept the inevitable, that therapeutic stubbornness, is what transformed Mercy's Edge. It wasn't a new piece of technology or a government contract that made them a legend. It was the reputation for being the place that would try, even when the entire universe said it was pointless. They became the last stop for hope because they proved hope was a verb, not a feeling. They became legendary because they saved the one life everyone else was prepared to mourn. And in doing so, they rewrote the future for everyone. Which brings us to the end of our story, and the beginning of theirs. So the next time you face something impossible, remember the medic, the cub, and those 18 hours. Sometimes the only thing stronger than a terminal diagnosis is a stubborn refusal to accept it as final. It doesn't require special tools or genius, just the will to try when everyone else has already written the ending. We've got more stories about humanity's strange place among the stars. You might be surprised what we can break and what we can fix when we put our minds to it. Hold your coffee. The next impossible thing is always right around the corner.